Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 6th, 2024. Today, I'm issuing an urgent call to all of you. Now is the time to get active before we end up in World War III or under the control of a global dictatorship of the military-industrial financial complex. If you're counting on people like Keir Starmer, if you're in England, or Le Pen, or Merz, or Trump to get us out of this, you're missing the point. None of those leaders have shown the capacity to do it. And we can talk more over the next days about some of the problems with the idea of a Trump presidency saving the world. But if you are counting on others to act to save your hide, you need to rethink. And I'll go through the situation in some detail right now, because what is being said from the establishment clearly is either you submit to our global dictatorship or prepare for perpetual war. Now, we're seeing an escalation of the Anglo-American war machine in Southwest Asia. There is full support from the Western financial elites for Israel, in total violation of the International Court of Justice ruling, which said not only must Israel stop killing, must Israel make sure there's humanitarian aid, they must stop inciting against the Palestinians, but the third nations must also abide by the provisional measures spelled out by the International Court of Justice. Now, one action that's been taken, besides the Israelis continuing the bombardment of Gaza in complete violation of the ICJ ruling, and continuing to incite against the idea of a Palestinian state and humanitarian aid, the move to cut off support for the UN Relief and Works Agency is a commitment of the 18 nations that are cutting the funding to starve out the Palestinians and put them deeper into a cycle of destruction and annihilation. And instead, what's needed is full humanitarian relief, which is what the International Court of Justice ordered. Now, secondly, we see the bombing extending now to Yemen, to Syria, to Iraq, and the threat of a war against Iran, as the war hawks are on full speed ahead. Now, in response to this, the LaRouche Organization put out a statement which will be appended in the description section of this update, titled, "Knew or Should Have Known. Governments complicit in genocide will not be able to plead ignorance at the coming Nuremberg Tribunal." This is a reference to the famous statement from the tribunal that the people who were involved in committing crimes knew or should have known. And given the proliferation of reports on social media from our network, there's no way that people could avoid knowing that genocide is being committed. The International Court of Justice said that they are going to investigate further to develop the proof of this, but they've called in their provisional measures for an end to acts of genocide, which is explicitly recognizing that the Nuremberg Code is being violated. Now, the marching orders that we've put out are as follows. We have to shut down the war machine. This means demonstrations demanding ceasefire and full humanitarian assistance in Southwest Asia. Secondly, a mobilization of city councils, state governments, any government agency to call for a ceasefire and humanitarian aid. An example being what happened with the Chicago City Council, the third largest city in the United States, when they issued a call to support the ceasefire and humanitarian aid. And then third, tell your congressman or congresswoman they'll be thrown out of office if they do not act in defense of the Constitution and international law, which means they have to rally against the policies of the neoconservatives and the neoliberals. Now, those of you who say you oppose the policies of the deep state, join us to show your patriotism. This is not an armchair philosophical game. It's about your future, your children and grandchildren's future, the future of your nation. And those of you who have made a commitment to fight against these policies, you need to get more involved personally, both in terms of time and financial support, because no one else is going to do it. Don't wait for a politician to act on the basis of principle or urgency. They're bought, they're controlled, the system is controlled, the media is controlled, the way people think is controlled. Those of you who are not in the bubble, join us to pull the bubble off the others. So if you live in the UK, if you live in Canada, or you live in Germany, or any transatlantic country, especially the United States, join our mobilization. Now in Germany, let me just point out that those of you who are marching in support of the supposedly anti-fascist demonstrations, these have been organized essentially by the government and government agencies. Wake up! The German government is in violation of the International Court of Justice provisional measures to stop genocide in Gaza. This is not the first time German government has supported genocide. If you want to oppose fascist policies, demonstrate against the coalition government and its subservience to the military-industrial financial complex war hawks. And that's the same point for every other nation, people who are watching. If you live in the global south, support your nation's mobilization. Many nations in the global south have stood up against the imperial powers, but it's necessary that they do more, that every person on the planet who's not insane join this mobilization while there's still time to stop the destruction that's looming if they're not stopped. Now, I will tell you the recognition of the danger is spreading. Let me give you two examples. First, from an unlikely source, the Sunday Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph of the United Kingdom. Its editor, Alistair Heath, had an editorial titled, "Europe is Finished," where he was very explicit in his complaints against the policies of the European Union and European governments. He said, quote, "The rot is too far gone, the decline too pronounced," unquote. He refers to, quote, "deluded Europeans," unquote, who are destroying Europe with, quote, "self-inflicted pathologies," unquote, imposed by, quote, "third-rate elites." This is a reference to the Green Deal. It's a reference to the financial policies of the European Union, the pro-war policies, a cry out from the United Kingdom, from the belly of the beast, saying things have gone too far and it's got to change. Now, the second example is from the Global Times of China, in an article titled, "NATO is pushing the Russia-Ukraine conflict towards a world war," unquote. And they quote Stoltenberg, who's the head of NATO, who said, quote, "Today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it might be Taiwan." The idea of global NATO as the sole hegemon, as the enforcer of the unipolar order. The Chinese have called it out. Others have called it out. Well, let's make sure that we're not just calling it out, but we're ending the policy of NATO as the instrument and tool of the military-industrial financial complex to impose its dystopian view of a world dictatorship, whether it's called the Great Reset, the New World Order, whatever they call it. It represents a continuation of the policy of a deranged establishment that will use war, starvation, any measure they can to impose their will. Now, an example of this is Steadfast Defender 2024, which is the NATO exercises, which are essentially a rehearsal for war with Russia. You think the Russians don't know this? You look at Ukraine. Ukraine has been destroyed by NATO. You have internal splits. You have fights going on. What are they fighting about? Well, there's a realist faction in Ukraine which is saying, look, let's take the deal we were offered over a year ago, nearly 2 years ago now, and stop the fighting and accept the idea of mutual security that Putin offered. The other option is to fight to the last Ukrainian, which has been the NATO policy from the beginning. the policy of the Biden administration, the policy of every government of Europe that supports it. And pouring more money into Ukraine is not going to win the war. Now, meanwhile, we're seeing, as on the positive side, that the polarization is obvious, the population is in motion. The farm demonstrations are continuing, and they're taking on increasingly an anti-European Union flavor. They're spreading now to Italy and to Spain. They're in France, they're in Germany. And what are they protesting? They're protesting the control of the cartels over food. This must become much more explicit and must be understood by everyone. The enemy here is the global corporate cartels, whether they're financial, whether they're big pharma, whether the food cartels, whether they're BlackRock, Vanguard, Lidl, Amazon. These cartels are the ones pushing the world in this direction. And they were not elected by anyone. And so we have to mobilize against them. Now, let me just conclude by saying this is a moment that's ripe for change. We can wipe away the establishment, which has had its way dominantly since really the last 600 years. But their puppets are planning for perpetual empire, which includes war and austerity. Now, our leadership, the LaRouche Organization, include the independent campaigns of Diane Serre for the Senate and the just announced campaign of Jose Vega, the arch disruptor, who's running an independent campaign for Congress in the Bronx. They can provide national leadership, and others should join them. We have national leadership teams coordinated by Diane and Jose. And I'll include a link for a video of a presentation from Jose just the other day. So you have to realize this is not just something that's academic. You've been forewarned. You can play a positive role to bring about a new paradigm. And that's essentially what people who are good people will do with their time and money from this point forward. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow. And share this video and share the links in the video to bring other people into the fight.